There comes a moment when God interrupts the noise of our lives to speak a word, not soft, not subtle, but a word that shakes the walls of our very home. And I believe this day, this very hour, God is speaking a message meant for you. For the Lord says there are two things in your house, two things hidden in the shadows, standing between you and the joy I have prepared for your life. And when God reveals what hinders you, it is not to condemn you, but to set you free. For just as he commanded Israel to remove the idols from their tents before entering the promised land, he speaks now, saying, remove these two things, and the blessing that has been shut up will be released. Today I invite you to open your heart, to listen, not to my voice, but to the voice of the one who formed you. Because when God reveals, he heals, and when he exposes, he restores. And the joy you have been longing for may be one step of obedience away. There comes a moment in every life when the voice of God breaks through the noise, not through the thunder, not through the earthquake, not through the fire, but through that still, unmistakable whisper that shakes the ground beneath everything we thought was secure. And in that moment, God speaks not to judge, not to accuse, but to reveal, because nothing that blocks your joy is greater than his desire to set you free. And the word that he speaks today is this. There are two things in your house, two things you have lived with, walked past, grown used to, that are stopping the happiness meant for your life. For the Lord in his mercy does not expose a thing to condemn you. He exposes it to deliver you, and he reveals not to shame you, but to restore what has been missing. And sometimes the greatest prisons are not outside of us, but within the very walls we call home. The walls decorated with memories, the rooms filled with routines, the corners left unexamined, the place where we sleep, where we think, where we speak, where we dream. This place becomes the battlefield between joy and sorrow, blessing and burden, peace and confusion. When God says there are things in your house blocking your happiness, he is not merely speaking of objects. He is speaking of something far deeper. He is speaking of the atmosphere that surrounds your life, the habits that cling to your spirit, the compromises that hide in plain sight. For the ancient people were warned not to allow idols in their tents, not because the idols had power, but because what they represented did. The idol was only an object, but the spirit behind it, the compromise, the surrender of holiness, that spirit opened a door to destruction disguised as comfort. And just as then, so now. The modern house has no carved statues, no altars of stone, yet it is filled with unseen altars, altars built through repetition, through permission, through silence. And God says this moment is not to condemn the house, but to cleanse it, because the joy he has appointed for your life has been waiting behind a door you have not yet opened. And he will show you the two things that stand in the way. But before he reveals what they are, he reveals why they matter. Because joy is not accidental. Happiness is not random. Peace is not a coincidence. These are fruits that grow from something planted. They are not dependent on circumstance, but on alignment. Alignment with the one who created your soul and knows what nourishes it. When something in your house stands against that alignment, your joy is interrupted, not because God has withdrawn, but because something else has taken his place. There is a principle woven through the ancient writings. Whatever you bring into your house, you invite into your life. If you bring peace, peace fills the rooms. If you bring anger, anger dwells at the table. If you bring gratitude, your walls echo with blessing. If you bring bitterness, bitterness spreads like dust in the corners. And many live with a suffering they cannot name because the source is not outside. It is within their own doors. God sees what you have tolerated, what you have allowed, what you have overlooked. Not because you are careless, not because you are unfaithful, but because life teaches us to normalize what wounds us. You grew accustomed to the weight. You became familiar with the emptiness. You accepted the unrest as part of the atmosphere. But God says it is not yours to carry. It is not part of his design. It is something you have learned to live with, but he has not called you to keep it. There are two things in your house stopping your happiness. And the first is this: something you have allowed because it was easier to allow than to confront. Something that began small, insignificant, unthreatening, like a seed dropped in the soil without intention. But seeds do not remain seeds. They grow, and what begins in convenience ends in bondage. You permitted something in your home to remain because confronting it would cost you comfort or peace with others or the illusion of stability, but in protecting temporary comfort, you sacrificed long-term joy. The ancient people were told to cleanse their tents before entering the promise, not after but before, because no one can step into God's fullness while clinging to what empties them. And in the same way, you cannot enter the joy appointed for you while keeping what drains it. The house is symbolic not only of your physical space, but of your inner life, your mind, your habits, your daily rhythms. What lives in your house lives in your spirit. The first thing God says is blocking your happiness is a voice, an inner voice allowed to speak louder than His, a voice that tells you what you are not rather than what you are, a voice that was planted through hurt, through disappointment, through comparison, through wounds not yet healed. You have allowed this voice to live in the rooms of your thoughts, to sit at your table, to speak over your mornings and whisper into your nights. And because you have lived with it long enough, you believe it belongs there, but it does not. There is a story in the ancient scriptures of a man who allowed a foreign garment into his tent, something God had forbidden. To him it seemed harmless, even useful, even beautiful. But what he did not understand was that the garment carried a curse he could not see, and when he hid it in his house, the curse hid with it. This is the nature of the inner voice you have allowed. It may not appear destructive, it may sound familiar, maybe even reasonable, but it is a garment woven with the threads of lies. It is a voice that tells you you are too weak, too late, too flawed, too broken, too far gone. And every time you allow it to speak, it steals a measure of joy appointed for you. God says the joy you lack is not because He has withheld it. It is because a lie has taken the seat where truth should dwell. This voice may have come through experiences, through criticism, through betrayal, through comparison. But where it came from is irrelevant. What matters is that it no longer belongs in your house. The second thing God says is blocking. Your happiness is connected to the first, though they are not the same. The first is the internal voice allowed to remain. The second is the external voice you have given authority, because the voices you permit will shape the atmos. Fear of your home. And there are people, influences, conversations, habits, and patterns that you have allowed into your space that do not carry the fragrance of peace. They carry the fragrance of distraction, of discouragement, of doubt. Every house has a door. And the purpose of a door is to permit what belongs and forbid what destroys. But many leave the door open not out of rebellion, but out of exhaustion. You did not choose the voices that entered. They simply entered because life wore you down. But whether you chose them or tolerated them, the result is the same. The atmosphere of the house shifts. And God says, your house has absorbed the influence of what never should have been allowed, for the ancient people were warned to guard their gates, because what entered the gate entered the nation, and your house is your nation. Your walls carry the echo of every word spoken within them. Words of peace strengthen the foundation, words of fear weaken it. Words of love anchor the home, words of anger fracture it. And when you allow voices that tear down rather than build up, you invite instability into the very structure of your life. The two things stopping your happiness are a voice within and a voice without. One speaks from your thoughts, one speaks from your surroundings, and together they weave a net that catches your joy and drains it drop by drop. God says the time has come to break the net. The internal voice must be silenced by truth, and the external voice must be removed by decision, because happiness cannot dwell in a house where lies are entertained and distractions are welcomed. Happiness is a fragile guest. It comes where the atmosphere is prepared. And the atmosphere is prepared when truth is enthroned and peace is protected. You must look into the corners of your house, the habits you have allowed, the patterns you have accepted, the conversations you entertain, the media you consume, the relationships you tolerate, and ask this, does this add to my peace or steal from it? Because what steals from your peace will ultimately steal from your joy. And what steals your joy will blind you to the blessings already given. God says your happiness has not disappeared, it has been smothered. Smothered under the weight of voices that do not belong, under the pressure of routines that drain you, under the heaviness of expectations not placed on you by Him. You have been navigating rooms filled with the remnants of old seasons, and old seasons cannot sustain new joy. The internal voice must be confronted, not once, but continually. Every time it speaks, truth must answer. Truth must remind you that you are not what the voice claims. You are not defined by your failures, by your past, by your wounds, by your weaknesses. You are defined by the one who breathed life into you, who called you by name, who appointed you with purpose. And purpose is incompatible with the lies you have tolerated. The external voice must be addressed. Some relationships must be redefined. Some influences must be limited. Some environments must be changed. Some boundaries must be strengthened. Because joy is not protected by hope alone, but by action. You cannot pray for joy while allowing what destroys it to dwell in your home. God says the two things stopping your happiness are not supernatural forces, not cosmic battles, not mysteries beyond understanding. They are permissions. Permissions you have given without realizing the cost, but what has been permitted can be revoked. Your happiness returns when the house is cleansed, when the internal voice is replaced by truth, when the external voice is replaced by peace, when the doors of your home become gates of discernment, when the walls of your house become boundaries of protection, when your life shifts from allowing what wounds you to welcoming what strengthens you. You do not need to search for happiness, it is already within reach. You need only remove what blocks its flow. The two things in your house are not your destiny, they are your distraction. And once they are removed, once truth replaces the lie and peace replaces the noise, happiness will not need to be pursued. It will return to the place where it always belonged. There is a truth woven into the fabric of every life, a truth older than kingdoms, older than nations, older than the stones beneath our feet. It is a truth spoken in the beginning, echoed through generations, whispered through prophets, and confirmed through experience. What you tolerate in your private life determines what you experience in your spiritual life. It is not the public moments that shape the destiny of a person, but the hidden ones. It is not the stage, the platform, the gatherings, or the outer performance that carries the greatest weight, but the unseen, the unspoken, the unnoticed places where the soul breathes and the heart reveals its true condition. And God says that the second thing in the house stopping your happiness is not simply an object or a voice, but a tolerance, something you have allowed privately that is quietly shaping your spiritual reality. For every person has two lives, the one the world sees and the one only God sees. The public life is polished, presented, and purposeful. It carries smiles, conversations, appearances, and activity. But the private life is raw, honest, unguarded. It holds the habits you repeat when no one is watching, the thoughts you entertain when the world is silent, the emotions you hide from others but cannot hide from yourself. And it is this private life, the unseen chambers of the heart, that becomes the soil where joy either grows or dies. In ancient days, the people were told to examine the inner rooms of their houses, not the outer courts. Because the enemy does not often enter through the front gate, he slips into the corners, the small spaces, the unguarded areas. And in the same way, the things that drain your happiness are not the loud, obvious, dramatic battles. They are the quiet compromises hidden in daily routines. The things you have allowed simply because you learned to live with them, the attitudes you tolerate, the habits you excuse, the thoughts you dismiss as harmless, the patterns you no longer question. These are the quiet thieves of joy, the silent weights on the spirit, the invisible chains binding the soul. God says the second thing stopping your happiness is connected to this. You have tolerated something in secret that is affecting your spirit in ways you have not understood. You have allowed something to live in the private rooms of your heart. And though it appears small, it has created a spiritual climate that cannot sustain true joy. For just as a single crack in the foundation weakens an entire house, a single tolerated compromise weakens the inner life. It may be unseen by others, unnoticed by the world, even ignored by you, but it is not hidden from God, and it is not without consequence, because happiness is not built on the surface, it is built from within. And what you tolerate within becomes the architect of your atmosphere. The ancient scriptures speak often of altars, both holy and unholy. Holy altars were places where blessing descended. Unholy altars were places where curses multiplied. And the strange thing is this: an altar did not need to be large to carry power. It only needed to be present. A small altar, hidden away, could influence an entire household. In the same way, a small compromise, a tolerated attitude, a repeated action, an unhealthy attachment becomes an altar in your inner life. You may not bow to it physically, but you bow to it by allowing it to remain. And whatever you allow to remain gains authority over your peace. There is a moment in every person's journey when the private and the spiritual collide, when the inner life reveals its influence on the outer life, when the hidden choice produces visible fruit. Perhaps you have felt this without understanding it. You have wondered why joy slips away so easily, why peace feels fragile, why happiness rises and falls like unpredictable tides. You have tried to fix circumstances, adjust relationships, change environments, but the true blockage is not around you. It is within the space you have tolerated. You can rearrange the furniture in your house, but if the foundation is cracked, the house still leans. You can open the windows and let in light, but if there is mold in the walls, the air will still be heavy. And you can pursue happiness in 1,000 outward ways, but if there is something tolerated in your private life, something God never intended to coexist with your joy, your spirit will remain divided, your peace incomplete, your happiness unstable. God sees what you have tolerated, not to accuse you, but to awaken you. He sees the private habit that has lingered too long. He sees the secret resentment you rehearse in your mind. He sees the bitterness you hold in the quiet spaces of your heart. He sees the emotional burden you have carried for years without release. He sees the fear you allow to speak louder in private than faith. He sees the pattern you return to in weakness. He sees the distraction you run to instead of Him. And He says, this is the second thing in your house. The tolerated compromise that has grown roots in the soil of your soul. Compromise never begins large. It begins as a whisper, a thought, a justification. It begins by telling yourself, it's not a big deal. I've been through worse. Everyone has flaws. It's just how I cope. It's part of who I am. I'll deal with it later. But compromise, once welcomed, never remains small. It grows, it spreads, it influences. It creates a pattern that shapes your reactions, your moods, your expectations, your decisions. And slowly, quietly, it reshapes your spiritual atmosphere. Happiness cannot thrive in a divided atmosphere. Joy cannot flourish in a heart weighed down by what it tolerates. Peace cannot rest in a house where compromise lives rent-free. And God, in His mercy, reveals this not to shame you, but to prepare you for freedom. There is a story told of a man who kept a poisonous plant in his garden. It was small, tucked away in the corner, left from a previous season. He knew it was there, but believed it harmless because it was isolated. One day, the roots of the plant began to spread beneath the soil, unnoticed. And though the plant remained small above the surface, its roots reached the roots of the nearby crops, poisoning them from within. The man did not understand why the fruits were bitter, why the flowers wilted, why the soil seemed dry. It was not the large plants that caused the destruction. It was the quiet, tolerated growth of a single poisonous root. This is the nature of private compromise. You may think it is isolated, harmless, manageable, but its roots extend into every other part of your inner life. What you allow in private will eventually reveal itself in how you love, how you speak, how you think, how you dream, how you respond, how you hope. Compromise is never neutral. It always shapes something. God says the second thing stopping your happiness is not external, it is internal. It is not loud, it is subtle. It is not something that forced its way in. It is something you tolerated. And what you tolerate becomes a tenant in your spiritual house. There is an ancient principle that says, a little leaven leavens the whole batch. meaning a small tolerated thing influences the entire atmosphere. You cannot keep a piece of compromise and expect to experience full joy. You cannot hold on to a private attitude and expect public peace. You cannot cling to a secret resentment and expect genuine happiness. You cannot nurture bitterness in the dark and expect blessing in the light. You cannot entertain a thought pattern that contradicts truth and expect a life built on truth. Your spiritual life is not determined by your public discipline, but by your private devotion. It is not shaped by what you declare with your mouth, but by what you allow in your heart. And the state of your inner life will always manifest in the state of your happiness. Some people wonder why happiness feels temporary, like holding water in cupped hands. It is because the private life has leaks created by what is tolerated but not confronted, leaks formed by habits that drain energy, thoughts that drain faith, emotions that drain peace, attitudes that drain joy, and until the leaks are sealed, happiness continues to slip away. The ancient people were commanded to cleanse the inner rooms of the temple because God understood something. What is tolerated inside will eventually shape what happens outside. The temple was the center of worship, the source of blessing, the place of encounter. But when the inner courts were filled with things that did not belong, the blessing could not flow. The presence could not rest. The joy could not thrive. Your inner life is the temple. Your private choices are the inner courts. And happiness does not come from outside. It flows from the condition of the inner rooms. If the inner rooms are cluttered with tolerated compromises, joy cannot move freely. God is not pointing to your failures. He is pointing to your freedom. He is revealing the tolerated thing not to condemn you, but to prepare you for something greater. Because the level of joy He desires for your life cannot coexist with the level of compromise you have accepted. Not because He is cruel, but because joy requires space free of bitterness, fear, doubt, distraction, and unhealthy patterns. Happiness requires a pure atmosphere. Joy requires an uncluttered heart. Peace requires an undivided mind. And God is inviting you into a cleansing, not of your house, but of your private life. You may ask yourself, what have I tolerated? What have I allowed simply because confronting it feels heavy? What have I accepted as normal though it steals my joy? What habit drains my peace? What emotion dominates my thoughts? What memory controls my reactions? What pattern repeats itself because I have not challenged it? What voice grows louder because I entertain it? What relationship or influence shapes me more than it should? What resentment do I hold in secret? What fear have I allowed to become part of my identity? These questions are not meant to wound, they are meant to illuminate, because the tolerated thing loses power the moment it is exposed. The compromise loses authority the moment you recognize it. The private burden loses weight the moment you acknowledge it does not belong. God is not angry at you. He is not disappointed in you. He is not judging you for the tolerated thing. He is inviting you to release it. He is calling you to remove it. He is urging you to confront it because He knows the joy waiting on the other side. He knows the peace that will come. He knows the transformation that will unfold when you stop tolerating what drains your spirit. The second thing stopping your happiness is not an enemy attacking you, but an area you have allowed. And the good news is this: what you allowed, you can refuse. What you tolerated, you can reject. What you accepted, you can remove. What grew roots in silence can be uprooted by decision. What shaped your atmosphere can be replaced by what strengthens it. When you stop tolerating what God did not plant, happiness will no longer be a visitor. It will become a resident. When your private life aligns with His truth, your spiritual life aligns with His joy. When the inner rooms are cleansed, the outer life begins to flourish. When the hidden places are restored, the visible places become overflow. And it all begins with one revelation. What you tolerate in private shapes what you experience in spirit. The moment God reveals something in your life, the atmosphere begins to shift. The moment he uncovers what has been hidden, exposes what has been tolerable for too long, and shines light on what has secretly held back your joy, something begins to move in the unseen realm. Because revelation is never meant to leave you standing still. Revelation is meant to call you into transformation. And God says the third reality is this: when you remove what he reveals, the door to restored peace and blessing begins to open. Not halfway, not partially, not symbolically, but fully, completely, undeniably. Because joy does not return through chance. It returns through the intentional act of clearing the space where God desires to dwell. There is a principle woven through eternity. God fills what is emptied. He blesses what is surrendered. He heals what is exposed. He restores what is returned to him. He pours joy into the vessel that has been cleansed of the things that once contaminated it. But he does not pour new wine into old wineskins. He does not pour fresh water into polluted wells. He does not place new garments upon those who cling to their ashes. He waits patiently, lovingly, persistently, until the heart is ready to let go of what has taken his place. The two things God has revealed in your house, the internal voice and the tolerated private compromise, were not just obstacles, they were occupiers. They took space. They consumed emotional capacity. They absorbed spiritual oxygen. They created an atmosphere where blessing could not fully rest, where peace could not settle, where happiness could not take up permanent residence. They became like spiritual intruders, setting the tone of the room before you even entered it. They shaped the mood of your mornings and the weight of your evenings. They influenced decisions you made without understanding why you made them. They dimmed your sense of hope without announcing their intentions. But the moment you begin to remove what God has revealed, everything changes. The moment you decide, not out of fear, not out of guilt, not out of pressure, but out of revelation, to cleanse the space he has identified, you activate a spiritual law that has existed since creation. What you surrender, he fills, and what you release, he replaces, and what you uproot, he restores. The act of removing is not merely symbolic, it is spiritual. When you remove something from your house, your internal life, or your external environment, you are not just cleaning a room, you are reclaiming territory. You are taking back ground that compromise stole. You are taking back authority that fear borrowed. You are taking back peace that distraction diluted. You are taking back clarity that lies clouded. You are taking back joy that resignation buried. The ancient people understood this. Before any great blessing, before any great victory, before any great restoration, they were commanded to remove what did not belong. Before entering the promised land, they had to remove idols. Before rebuilding the altar, they had to clear the stones. Before dedicating the temple, they had to cleanse the courts. Before receiving fresh fire, they had to remove the old ashes. And the removal was not the blessing itself, but it unlocked the blessing. This is what God is saying. The removal is the unlocking. The cleansing is the opening. The surrender is the beginning of restoration. And the moment you choose to release what he has revealed, the atmosphere of your home begins to shift. The weight begins to lift. The heaviness begins to break. The cloud begins to clear. The joy that seemed far away begins to approach. The peace that felt like a memory begins to awaken. The blessing you thought had bypassed you begins to find your address again, because blessing does not require perfection, it requires alignment. Peace does not require performance, it requires space. Joy does not require ideal circumstances, it requires an uncluttered heart. And the removal of what God exposes is the act of making room. Imagine your heart like a house filled with furniture collected over years. Some pieces were inherited, some were purchased, some were brought in accidentally, some were carried inside by others, some were kept out of sentiment, some were too heavy to move. Over time, the rooms became crowded. There was no space for new things. The windows were blocked. The light could not fully enter. You navigated the room sideways, stepping around memories, squeezing past disappointments, tiptoeing around regrets. And because it happened slowly, you did not realize how crowded the space had become. When God reveals the two things in your house, He is walking through the rooms with you, not as a critic, but as a restorer. And when he points to something that must be removed, it is because he sees what you cannot see. He sees the space that will open once it is gone. He sees the peace that will settle once the room is cleared. He sees the joy that will radiate once the obstruction is lifted. He sees how the light will return, how the air will flow, how the atmosphere will change. The removal is not loss, it is preparation. There is a story of a woman who inherited a large, beautiful home. Over time, the attic filled with boxes, old items, forgotten belongings, remnants of earlier seasons. She rarely visited the attic and hardly noticed the weight it served as a burden above her head. One day, she discovered that the weight in the attic had begun to warp the ceiling beams. The structure of the house was being compromised not by storms or enemies, but by what she stored inside. The carpenter told her, "If you remove what does not belong, the house will breathe again." This is what God is saying. If you remove what does not belong,